Hello and welcome to Panel on Panels, the podcast about all things comics and comics related. I, of course, am your host, John Campbell. Sitting next to me, Mike Gorgoni.
Yes, I am indeed Mike Gorgoni.
And next to him, Mr. Donovan Eilert.
Hi, everybody.
Which one? Was that Klingon?
That was Klingon.
Yes.
I told you that was the next one.
Okay.
Yes.
yeah.
I love that you're committing to this.
Follow up, I like
Yeah.
it.
Do you have another one?
I have one more, and it's going to be a
That's
surprise.
it. So you get to hear that next week, folks.
Yes, that's right.
Ooh, excitement.
And
Make it through
Write
the
in.
week.
Write in with your suggestions.
Well, today we have a
Language Greetings with Donovan Eilert.
Yeah.
It's a new podcast. It's going to be
Yeah.
its first spin-off.
If anyone wants to sponsor that, that'd be great. I'll buy you a pizza or
The
something.
podcast is just made of cutting out the segments of this show where you speak in other languages.
Sure.
So it's like a
30
15
second, yeah.
We could call it a spin-off if you want.
It's a bit of a spin-off.
It's a micro-series.
It's a micro series. I like it. So today our topic is an interesting one. I think it's we're talking about classics, the classics of comic books.
Now, do you think this is an interesting topic, or do we collectively think this is an interesting
We
topic?
didn't take a vote earlier.
No.
Did we not? What do you guys think? We can just change mid show.
It's going to hold my interest enough. Yeah.
It's okay.
Great. I love the enthusiasm already. We're really picking things up right off the ground here.
That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
So anyway, yeah, our comics, like any other medium, they have their classics, their stalwarts, their must-reads, must-absorbs.
Who refers to it as a stalwart? That means something that you use that word. I don't think you know what it means.
Stalwart?
Yes.
An enduring thing?
Sure.
Yeah. How is that not a classic? How is that not a synonym for classic?
I just have never heard it used in that context as, like, I'm going to observe the stalwarts of this medium.
Is it inaccurate, though?
Donovan?
I don't think it's...
No backup on
You're
this
going to
one?
bring me into this, guy? I mean, I don't know.
I think it's used in proper
I think
context.
Sure. I've never heard it used like that, but I don't think it was wrong. Is that...
Look, we are challenging people on this podcast, all right? We are challenging the English language.
I'm sorry
we are
to get
challenging
us
our
off track
listeners.
like this, but
How
I've
dare you?
just never heard it used in that
How
context.
dare
the
you?
graphic novel Stalwarts.
Well, look out, folks, because next
No,
week
no.
we're
From
going to have
now
a
on,
new
we have to
co-host.
refer to them as stalwarts.
Yes.
So,
thank
John,
you.
let's go over the stalwarts.
Yes, let's do the stalwarts.
And that just sounds like you're saying Star Wars, and that makes me really excited.
Star Wars, also a stalwart.
Yes, apparently.
Yeah, it's a stalwart of film. That'll be our next podcast. Film stalwarts.
Should be a lot of listeners for that.
Yep. So we're looking at that. What are the classic books of the medium?
No, John, stalwarts.
The stalwarts of the medium.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Hey, you started this. You stalwarted this.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, I hope you guys enjoy your last episode on the podcast. Yeah, because this is the end. You're both fired.
I regret nothing.
Good. I'm glad. You can say that in court when I sue you. So,
Your Honor, he made me use the word stalwart too many times.
yeah, no one can see the gun that's being pointed at you right now. It's under the table. It's cocked. It's ready to go. So we're talking about the stalwarts of the medium, and
It's going to happen.
this episode's gotten far too silly right away. So the stalwarts of the medium are, I don't know. I mean, how do you guys want to open this up?
Oh, I think we've already opened it up.
Yeah, I think it's opened up a little bit, but let's get into maybe some more specific things.
So what do we think are, like, the stalwarts? What do we think?
I think right off the bat we have to talk about if only, well, maybe just Watchmen, or as I was talking to you before the show, Donovan, maybe just the work of Alan Moore in general. Because as I was starting to compile a list of what are the classics,
happen to be lots of
stalwarts of the medium, I started writing down titles.
Sure.
And at a certain point, I'm like, okay, this is by Alan Moore. This one's also by
Also
Alan Moore.
by Alan Moore.
And these
Oh,
are-
one more
let
by
me
Alan
just,
Moore.
Let me just put Alan Moore on the list.
Yeah.
Not that all of his work constitutes a stalwart by any means. No, in fact, much of it are things that people should probably avoid.
The ramblings of a crazy cave
Right.
wizard.
And once again, a giant middle finger to Alan Moore on this podcast.
Hey, we got to keep this Alan Moore dissing train going.
We have trashed this man on here. And what's great is it's like insulting the Amish. He'll never hear it.
But the strange part is that despite these insults, we still love him. Is the problem.
You know what, though?
He's great.
I think that's indicative of comic book fans' reaction to the man.
No.
It's a very love-hate relationship. He's written some of the greatest works in the medium, but he's also a giant dick to comics and comics fans. He's been horrible. I mean, he says terrible things about comic books.
He is legitimately a crazy person.
Exactly. So it does sort of represent this feeling of how do we feel about Alan Moore? I mean, we can talk about us specifically, but I think we can speak for the comics community because there seems to be kind of a consensus of this, like, oh, he's a genius, but we also sort of hate him. Like,
I don't know. No, hate I don't think is the right word. I think we are aware of just how crazy he can be in his personal opinions, but it comes down to separating the artist from their art.
Right.
Is, I think, something you have to do in any medium. But comics especially.
And he's not, the only one.
One of the problems with that, though, is that so many of his comments that upset me are about the medium that he's an artist in.
Yes.
Which is sort of an odd thing as well, because it's easy to just separate somebody's personal opinions about things or actions from their art.
Sure.
It's easier to do that than when somebody is, just trashing comics.
Yeah, no, it's true. Especially,
it's certainly an interesting debate. But that being said, we are here to talk about the stalwart work of Mr. Alan Moore.
We get immediately to Watchmen.
Watchmen, of course. Probably widely considered maybe the best comic or the most. I mean, it's the only one that's on the New York Times 100 best books of all time list. I mean, it's sort of the comic that punctured the culture in a way that others didn't.
Oh, I mean, it represents a certain cross-section of comics as literature.
Right. Which I think is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about classic. Well, we can actually, let's look at that as we go through this, actually.
But I think something that makes it a classic is something that lets it define the medium. Like, you look to those things as, this is the pinnacle of what this medium can accomplish.
Which I think, regardless of your opinion of the book, you certainly have to say is Watchmen constitutes that.
Well, yeah, because what it does is it blends prose and the visual medium of comics in such a way that we really, well, one, we don't see anymore. I think it was more prevalent while Watchmen was being written, because if you look at Claremont's run on X-Men and stuff, you get a lot more wordy descriptions and stuff.
Yeah. There's a real sense of a third-person narrator
exactly.
in it that's
and
not
that was certainly
I would almost never see in comics now.
Exactly, but that was more prevalent during the age of Watchmen. But because of Watchmen's continued popularity, well, I don't even know if popularity is the right word, but cultural importance.
Yeah, that seems right.
Because
I think the movie.
If I listed
more.
my favorite comics of all time, and we've done that on this podcast, Watchmen's not on there.
No, me neither. Don, would it be on yours?
I don't remember if it was. I don't think it was on mine.
We didn't do all-time favorites. We were doing well. I don't know. We had sort of a list of that was kind of a hodgepodge of stuff we like now versus stuff that's. But no, certainly Watchmen would not be on that list of mine. It's not one of my favorites.
Well, and
I have what I would say. My opinion is I have more respect for it than enjoyment of it.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's apt for a lot of people, and it's definitely not one that if I'm recommending somebody get into graphic novels that I say, oh, go read Watchmen right away.
Well, because you know what it is? It's a real deconstruction of the medium and the superhero genre specifically.
You have to have quite a bit of knowledge about comics in general going into Watchmen to, I think, really appreciate it.
Because one of the things that's so amazing about it was how different it was and how much it acknowledged superhero conventions and broke them down and changed comics in that way. So if you don't already have some kind of grasp of it, I don't know that you would see that it's as great. I mean, sure, it's a good story and there's some interesting characters in it.
Sure.
But the more subversive elements that make it such a classic would be lost on a lot of people.
Yeah.
It would be a terrible place to start, I
Well,
think.
and can you imagine if somebody read that first and thought every comic book was going to be like that one?
Oh, boy.
God. I mean, not even all of Alan Moore's stuff is
not
like
at all.
Watchmen.
It's such a specific thing, and it's so singular. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's not... What else is like Watchmen?
Before Watchmen.
Well, there's Before Watchmen. Which, have you guys read any Before Watchmen?
I read the Rorschach one.
Me too. I also read the comedian one.
Was that any good?
It's all right.
Yeah.
I've read neither.
That was my general consensus I got online of just they're all they're completely unnecessary, but they're fine.
Yeah, they don't. I don't think they hurt Watchmen in any way.
Yeah.
I think they're fun stories. I like those characters. I mean, I only read those two because those were the characters I wanted to know more about.
Yeah.
And I thought they were fun.
Yeah.
That was Azzarello who wrote those.
Yeah.
And he's great.
And they're well
at
done. Least for
Mm-hmm.
the Rorschach one, I was just again, my opinion was about the same as the consensus, which was this is completely unnecessary. It's fine. I don't care that it exists.
No, I mean, I love the character Rorschach.
Sure.
So I read the story, but I mean, I don't think they did any damage. I didn't read, some of the ones that I think might be more interesting is there were ones written about, there's like a dollar bill one. There's several like of the side characters. Those might be more interesting in certain ways because they are so marginalized in the, I mean, they're such minor characters in the actual piece that is Watchmen.
Sure. You wonder how those sold compared to the other ones, because people reading Watchmen, like Rorschach is the majority of people's favorite character,
right?
So his is going to sell no matter what.
I don't know if they were individual issues or if they were backups. They might have been backups in the back of like a Rorschach.
Yeah,
I think they probably were.
Interesting.
I think that was the case. I don't know for sure though. I
only time and the internet will tell.
That's true. That's pretty much everything on this podcast.
Yeah.
I think.
Just wait for someone on the internet to yell at us about it.
So Watchmen is this great work. Obviously, we can all talk about his greatness. I mean, it's like Citizen Kane to me. It's the Citizen Kane of comics. I think that's fair. Whereas that's a movie I have a lot of respect for, but I don't necessarily love that movie.
Yeah. Saturday night, let's throw on a great old movie. What do you guys want to watch?
Yeah,
Citizen Kane.
I mean, and like with Citizen Kane, that's not my favorite movie by Wells. And Watchmen is not my favorite comic by Moore.
Oh God, no.
No, I mean, I would much rather talking about other great works by Alan Moore that I think are classic. I would say Saga Swamp Thing I probably like more than Watchmen.
I like Top 10 more than
Top 10 is very good.
Top 10's a lot of fun.
Killing Joke, I think.
Yes, that was the other one that I was thinking would definitely be on the list.
Well,
I mean,
last time I checked, it's been one of the only graphic novels to be on the New York Times bestseller in the graphic novel section since it's been published. It's never been. I don't think it's off that list. And
no, I mean
they
continue to publish new editions of it. They continue to do collector's editions of it. There was a new hardcover that came out a couple years ago.
I'm sure this will be a podcast topic in the future, but like of the quintessential Batman stories, that one's
unquestionably,
up there. Huge importance.
It's probably the quintessential Joker story.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, regardless of the Batman.
More of his backstory.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, what he does in that has so many implications and repercussions.
I would actually almost say that,
Batman.
surprisingly enough, some of the stuff that Snyder's done recently with him is almost like some of the quintessential Joker stuff now.
I agree.
But how long was that gap between that and
huge.
now?
And I think that the Joker that's in The Killing Joke is the Joker we see in most things now. Like the Chris Nolan Joker is very much the Killing Joke Joker. Even the Nicholson Joker has a lot of the Killing Joke in him.
When did The Killing Joke get published?
It was mid-'80s.
So I'm just working out the Batman timeline in my head.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Was it before? I don't know if it was before or after Returns. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's roughly
Only time
around
and internet will
What's
tell.
interesting is Watchmen, Killing Joke, and Dark Knight Returns were all roughly in the same time.
Yeah, which is really interesting. That was a good time for Batman.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly DC was on top of the world at that point. I mean, this was the time in the 80s there where DC stole away everybody at Marvel.
Yeah.
They stole Miller, they stole John Byrne, they stole Denny O'Neil.
Well, and Marvel was like right smack dab in the middle of their Silver Age stuff, which was.
Well, this is coming out of the Silver Age into this is like Secret Wars era, is when Jim Shooter's running Marvel.
Yeah.
So they were turning more into the corporate thing of, because Secret Wars, of course, was tie-in with
the
toys.
First gigantic crossover event.
Yeah, but the whole thing was designed to sell action figures.
No, definitely.
They needed a plot to make sense that why all the heroes would be together, and so they wrote Secret Wars. Something that is remembered as a huge event, but is far from a classic.
No, yeah.
I mean, it's not even very good.
No, I mean the only really rememberable thing to come out of that is the whole black suit, Spider-Man,
right?
suit
Symbiote
thing.
suit,
yeah,
and which and then Venom and stuff, and that led to what would be considered a classic run, which is Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man stuff.
Definitely. But whether or not that's a comic book classic, I don't know.
Well, this leads me to my next thing, which is when we look at things like Watchmen or The Killing Joke, or we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but Dark Knight Returns.
Definitely.
These are very stories. What do we constitute classics? So it's easy to make them classics because they're just one thing.
Right.
But how do we look at something like a run somebody has? Is that a classic? Is Claremont's X-Men a classic? Because I think it is.
that was actually one of the points I was going to bring up. Was I believe there are specific runs by specific authors that I would consider as classic.
Right, I think because I was
Claremont's run on X-Men is one of the examples.
Because I was looking at it and I was thinking, well, do I put Days of Future Past? Do I put Dark Phoenix Saga?
All of it.
It's all of it. It's Claremont's whole run on that was genius. I mean, it's one of the. I mean, that legitimately is one of my favorite runs ever in comics, and he defined those characters really.
The other I would bring up, and one that is near and dear to my heart, is Bendis's run on Ultimate Spider-Man, like from. Not necessarily into the Miles Morales stuff, but from the start of his Peter Parker to the end of his Peter Parker in Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I would consider that, because it is almost also kind of a singular thing,
Oh,
in that
definitely.
it has a start, a middle, and an end.
It's a chunk of work, for
Right.
sure.
And there's like 20-some-odd trades.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
I
don't
could
know.
go over and count them all, but no, it's like 20-some-odd.
Well, because there's that weird thing where they changed the way Ultimate stuff worked,
Yeah,
so that the numbers stopped and then they started again.
sort of.
But
Damn
the
you,
story
Ultimatum.
kept going. Yeah.
Not a classic Ultimatum.
No.
I
But
think
better than Secret Wars.
I think Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I've talked about that
Yeah.
before, but I think all of that is pretty defining with
Oh yeah.
the death and the rebirth and all that jazz. I definitely
sure.
think that's a defining classic.
I mean, I think one, and we're going to talk about this guy a few times, is Frank Miller's Daredevil run.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the Daredevil run. I mean, I also enjoyed the Bendis run and the Brubaker, and I'm really liking Mark Waid stuff now. But when I think Daredevil, I think Frank Miller's Daredevil, the Born Again story and the Elektra stuff, and
I don't know. I always think Ben Affleck.
Yeah, who doesn't think that?
which is interesting is that even that movie, as terrible as it was,
no,
so much of the iconography in it.
So much of like the shots, like you think of something like 300 and how it like captured the images from the book and put them on the movie. Like years before that, Daredevil did a really good job of capturing like
at least the visuals of Miller's
visually,
stuff.
of Miller's stuff.
We,
You know,
we
it
cannot
really like
stress that enough. Visually,
Yes.
it's very much like the Daredevil. Miller even has a cameo in that movie.
he does.
Yeah, he is. He's
The Vulture's in that movie.
he plays the Vulture. No, he plays a security guard that Bullseye kills with a pen.
Oh, good. Yeah. Colin Firth as Bullseye.
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell. I'm sorry.
I wanna see
Colin Firth as Bullseye.
Would
He's
actually
a
be
charmingly
way more
befuddled
entertaining.
Bullseye.
Yes.
What a delight.
Mr. Firth, if you're listening, please request that part.
I will say, I mean, not that we're going to get too much in that movie. He is one of the better parts of that movie, I think.
Colin Farrell's
He's
Bullseye.
one of the more interesting parts of that movie.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's a discussion for a different
Sure,
day, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I think for sure the Miller
Just go
Daredevil
listen to
run.
the episode of How Did This Get Made of Daredevil.
Daredevil, yeah.
And that pretty much sums up, I think, most of my opinions.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Slap my face on Manzukis and pray that I'm half as funny as him.
No, so I think the Miller run on Daredevil would definitely be considered classic. Are there other runs? I mean, we've talked about the Jeff Johns Green Lantern. We talked about the Bendis Ultimate Spider-Man. Is there other stuff that you guys consider? Because, I mean, I think by talking about stuff like the Johns Green Lantern and the Bendis Ultimate Spider-Man, these are more the modern classics, which is something I want to talk about, too. It's, of course, as with most classics, these are things that happened a while ago.
Sure.
What's the stuff that's coming up? I mean, I think this Snyder Batman
The Snyder
run-
Batman, this is going to become the quintessential Batman, I
Absolutely.
feel like. Like, all of the best Batman is being produced by Scott Snyder right now.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about it.
And some of the best Batman in the last, 20 years is being produced right
Mm-hmm.
now, and that's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. He's really done some incredible stuff with that character, and the other characters as well, like you mentioned with the Joker and Death of the
yeah.
Family. I think his Riddler in Zero Year is really
Oh,
fascinating.
man, that's so good.
Yeah, introducing new things like the Court of the Owls, a whole new set of villains with that.
And I think the big issue that we're going to have to figure out is the runs are more about character development, or the single issue are more about the story.
Yeah,
Like, I really enjoy Hush. You know,
Yes.
I wouldn't call that the quintessential Batman though, but I really like the story and it's really engaging, really interesting.
Or Kevin Smith's, Widening Gyre
And Cacophony.
and Cacophony
Yeah.
are both really good Batman
and
stories.
whenever Bellicosity comes out,
Yeah, sure.
But you don't get as much
Waterbury.
development for Batman himself. You know, so there's not as much where the runs. You feel like you get the development of the characters more.
right? Well, because it's sort of like a movie versus a TV show sort of thing. You're looking at a singular thing versus an overarching thing.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean that one of the interesting things I think we find as I'm listening to us talk about this is that we're not talking about the original creations of these characters as classics. We're not talking about Amazing Fantasy number 15 that started.
Well-
we're not talking about Detective Comics number 27.
No, we're not, John.
I just think that's interesting. These are not characters like the. I mean, is there anybody whose debut is a classic? I mean, Watchmen doesn't really count because it didn't continue unless you count before Watchmen. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think there's some good stuff early on, but I don't think any of it I would call. I mean, there's the Lonely Place of Dying for Batman a long time ago.
yeah, but even that was in the 80s.
I guess. What is old? What you guys are calling
I'm
the
talking
40s
Like
and
40s.
50s?
Golden Age stuff.
Yeah.
None of that is.
I mean,
You're talking like an essential volume of like.
yeah.
Like we're looking for the Ditko and like the
Right.
Stan Lee stuff, and it's just like
I think
But that would be like-
that's the closest I can think of is that Lee Ditko Spider-Man run is pretty
yeah,
iconic.
no,
at the
it's
very
true.
least.
Yeah,
But there's
don't
not-
do drugs, kids. Excelsior.
Yeah, I mean the individual pieces of it you can get into whether or not, but I think the overarching what Lee did, I think that was his finest writing.
Yeah.
Unquestionably, was his Spider-Man run.
Yeah.
That was the character whose voice was probably the closest to his, I think, and
Sure.
and that really showed in that character.
But what of any medium are you like, wow, the first stuff is the best stuff? Like, you look at all the silent movies that were made, and there's a few of them that are great.
Metropolis, I mean, certainly being
Yeah. There's a few great things that happen, but
like the general.
as a whole,
Well, it's not a silent film podcast, but I'm saying like
Yeah,
like
we
that
could
there
go
are
off on that.
examples of that, but
But
there
would-
aren't many. There is almost none in comics.
Right.
I mean, the early stuff is
Well,
pretty terrible, really. Honestly, like
To
if you
be
look back
fair,
at
though,
it,
you look at how those early comics were shackled by like stuff like the Comic Code Authority and
yeah, you get into that in the 50s for sure.
right. But in terms of how they were limited in their storytelling, if only because they were considered a kids medium.
They were considered a kids medium, and they were also disposable, and they were individual. You had to be able to pick up a comic and not know anything and be able to follow it.
Right. So like
There were no arcs.
The early Captain America, some of the best comics. You look at like the Brubaker stuff.
Yeah, which I would consider another modern classic.
Winter Soldier,
Yeah.
definitely. But you look at some of that original stuff, and that's on the same level as like Archie. And I apologize to all of the Archie fans out there who are now screaming at us, but like that stuff is kind of disposable. And like
Yeah.
in terms of great storytelling, I'm not going to be looking to Jughead for like the.
Maybe what's coming in Archie you might be able to.
Go on.
Okay, I didn't. This is a little bit of a side.
What?
no.
Are you aware?
We're interested.
Do you know about this, Donovan?
Who's
What the hell are you talking
They're
about?
rebooting Archie.
Okay.
Because he died, right? He died.
Yes,
Okay.
and Mark Waid and Fiona Staples are taking over Archie.
What the fuck? Are you serious?
They're gonna make Archie awesome.
Oh my god.
You can look it. Go look it up if you want to see it. You can see some examples of Fiona Staples' art on Archie.
Wait. Is this going to be like
It's a-
published as?
It's a new continuity in Archie comics.
They're going to start a brand new run and
Archie number
continue
1.
it. It's not a one-off thing.
I don't know how long it's going to go for, but no. This
Are
is,
we going to
is
find
going
this
to
in
be-
grocery stores, the checkout stand?
I have no idea, but it's very strange. It's a legitimate. We may be looking at a classic Archie run.
You're blowing my mind right now, John.
I
That's
couldn't
all I'm
believe it
saying.
myself. The preview images are gorgeous. I mean, Fiona Staples' art,
Well,
if
of
you've read
Yeah,
Saga,
yeah.
is amazing.
And Mark Waid,
Yeah,
great,
One of the
excited.
best writers today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
No,
and
that's-
the two of them are writing and drawing Archie.
I don't know what to think anymore.
I
We
don't know
are.
either.
Oh, do you know when it comes out? We
I
have
don't-
to review that when it comes
We will.
out.
I will guarantee when it comes out, we will review Archie number 1 by Mark Waid. And
I
Fiona
will
Staples. That
probably
will be a
buy
future episode.
every trade
I
just to
guarantee
say I
you, we
did.
will be reviewing that.
My gosh.
I know.
Oh man, are we gonna have an Archie episode?
Yeah, we are going to have an Archie episode.
Damn it! I thought we could avoid this.
Nope, can't do it.
Okay.
Like
Who
everything
are they
else in
gonna-
life, you can't get away from Archie.
Who else are they going to reboot? Are they going to do like,
Richie Rich.
Family Circus and Garfield? Are they going to like
Yeah.
make those people like
Sure.
legitimate, awesome?
Why not? Blondie
Great.
and
I want to
Blondie
see
and Dagwood.
Warren
Yeah.
Ellis write Sonic the Hedgehog.
I mean, now we
would
know it's
love that.
possible. Now
That
we
would
know
be-
it's
That
possible.
would be the trippiest Sonic
Oh,
the
it would
Hedgehog.
be so nuts.
Yeah.
He would come up with the most convoluted reason why there is a supersonic hedgehog,
Exactly.
and it would be glorious.
So we've touched on Mr. Frank Miller a little bit.
Yes.
And I don't think any podcast about classic comic books or stalwarts of the industry can. Now, I would say Frank Miller himself is a stalwart of the industry.
He's produced some of the most like high profile and most well read stuff for individual characters of almost anyone in the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, I've put him. I mean, I think if you were to start counting up the classics, he and Alan Moore would probably have as many contributions to the medium.
Also, and as I said before, he is a Marvel supervillain. He is the Vulture.
It's true.
So,
it's true. He does have a Vulture-like appearance. But hey, we love him, and if he wants to come on the podcast,
sure. Frank Miller, if you're listening.
We want to talk to you. But no, I mean, Miller, Dark Knight Returns, of course, is once again, sort of like Watchmen, a brilliant piece of work. Something I personally enjoy more than Watchmen.
Definitely.
But also, okay, you go, yeah.
It requires way less wherewithal of the comics medium in general to enjoy and respect, because all you really need to know to go into Dark Knight Returns is Batman.
A bit of
Batman. Do you know the
Batman.
basic concept of Batman?
And some of his villains.
Even then...
I don't know. I think you need to know Two-Face and Joker at the very least.
Sure.
To grasp that.
But thanks to the Nolan movies, everyone knows that.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think you're right. To begin with, those are characters that are sort of in the cultural zeitgeist.
Sure.
They are, those are famous characters aside from comics. They're easily recognizable. There have been numerous versions of them. And that's it's sort of the opposite of Watchmen in a lot of ways, because he took something that was so recognizable and so long-running and iconic, and he did the same thing that Moore did with Watchmen, but he did it to Batman.
But we are also, we haven't referenced this yet, but Batman Year One was also Frank Miller.
Which is interesting that he wrote that after Returns.
Sure.
Yeah, but absolutely.
As far as Batman classics
he wrote two
go,
of the most iconic and greatest Batman stories.
And All-Star Batman, guys. We can't forget that.
Yeah.
Such a classic.
Such
a stalwart of the series.
Is beautiful.
I was going to skip. The art is amazing.
The art is
Jim
amazing.
Lee,
Yeah.
As always.
He
incredible.
is the goddamn Batman, guys. God.
He's kind of Moorish in the sense that he writes some great stuff, but he's also a little kooky.
Yeah,
he is a little
in a different way, but yeah,
yeah, and a more aggressive.
And neither one of them.
He's
is
not
really
going to leap out on a
interest.
bridge and ask you 3 questions like Alan Moore would.
No. But you'll be having dinner with him, and he'll go off on a rant about something for 20 minutes.
Sure, or he'll go off and write Holy Terror.
Right, which is kind of a rant in comic book form. A lot of anger in that book.
Yeah, justifiably so. But
sure, and Dark Knight Strikes Again, obviously.
Ooh, Dark Knight Strikes Again.
Yikes.
It's interesting. I've read that book. I own that book, and I've read it, I'm going to say 5 times now.
Wow. I just read it the once.
Yeah, and it's... I'm not going to say it's grown on me, but I dislike it less.
Interesting.
With every successive reading.
Have you read it, right? No?
Yeah.
There are pieces of it that I really like.
I would agree with that. There's some really good stuff.
The stuff with the Atom is super cool, like him stuck in a petri dish. The stuff with... Isn't that...
it's true. It's...
I know a lot of people have talked
some
about...
of the stuff with Superman is really cool in that book.
Yeah, and some of the stuff with Superman I hate in that book.
That's true.
I know a lot of people have talked about it's better if you read it not as a direct sequel to Dark Knight Returns. It's better not to look at it as that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But at the same time, it is a sequel to Dark Knight Returns, so it's in this weird place. And half of it was written before 9/11, and then half of it was written after.
But I think it's a decent segue, though, into what I would consider another stalwart, and that's Kingdom Come.
Yes. It's Wade.
Yeah. But I would consider that one of the quintessential Justice League stories.
Yes, absolutely.
But again, not one that you can just hand to somebody and be like, start here.
No.
No.
See, and that's the issue I have with a lot of the ones
Is
that
that how
I
we're defining
enjoy.
classics, though?
No, I'm just saying, for me, that's a classic. But people ask you, what are the classics? I want to get into comics.
Well,
where do you start them?
Oh, see, this brings up another debate, which is what's the difference between a classic and something that you like a jumping on point? Because you would
I think in comics those are 2 different things.
Well, but in most things it's the reverse. You would think where do I start? I start with the classics. If you're reading novels, if you want to, who's not the idea of somebody getting into novels, but let's say I want to read the classics.
Sure.
Because that's the pinnacle of the medium. The same thing with movies, not as much in comics.
I actually think it's almost 100% not that.
No, I think
barring
you're right.
maybe stuff like Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man.
Right. That's its own
is a pretty
thing.
good jumping off thing. Or
that's very much.
I don't even
story.
if somebody asked me where do I start with X-Men, I wouldn't even point them to Claremont.
I would
really as right.
I would start with I would start with Giant Size X-Men.
Oh,
That's because they'd been gone for like 10 years at that point.
Yeah, fair enough.
And that was them coming back.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that.
I guess
that's mostly because I read Claremont stuff like midway through.
Right. The Dark Phoenix stuff. But if you go back to the like that mid 70s stuff,
sure.
when it's first starting, that's a good place to start, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think.
But on a whole, these classics that we're talking about aren't really good examples of things that you point to people and say, yeah, start here. Like Kingdom Come.
No.
Holy crap, do you need to know everything about the DC universe for that book to make sense?
Right, and because that's really a story of the end of the DC universe in a lot of ways. That's
in an
the last
awesome
story.
way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's always a cool idea, much like Dark Knight Returns, where it's sort of the last Batman story to a certain extent. And I think that's always an interesting thing, and partially what makes these classics is that because comic books don't have an end, for the most part.
Yeah.
So another thing that I would point to as a classic is All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison, which is the end of Superman. It's the last Superman story.
But at the same time, I feel like you could give that to somebody a lot quicker than you could give some of these other ones.
Yeah, no, I think that's true.
And didn't we talk? What was the Alan Moore we talked about? What's so funny about?
Well, that's not Alan Moore.
Or who's that by?
I don't know who that's by. I just know that's what's so funny about True Justice in the American Way. You're talking about.
Well, then you said Alan Moore wrote one about the end of.
You're talking about
Superman.
the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
That's right.
That's
I'm
Alan
sorry.
Moore. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
And isn't that it's the end of?
It's the last Superman story. Yeah.
Yeah. Was this all at the same time that people were writing like the end of these arcs?
No. He did that prior to the other stuff.
Okay.
Now, where does that fall in terms of like the death of Superman?
Oh, well before it. Like probably 10, 12 years before it.
Would you consider that a classic?
I consider that a really important work. It was a huge moment in the medium when
Sure.
that happened. But I wouldn't consider it a classic.
So it's
per
a
se.
historical footnote, but you wouldn't necessarily call it a...
Kind of like
I think it's better than this, but it's in that same way that Secret Wars changed the industry in a way.
Sure.
well, and it's the same place I think of like Jason Todd being offed. Like,
Yes.
that's definitely like
These are turning points in comics. These are things where things change. These are points where things change, but they're not necessarily classics. A Death
Yeah.
in the Family is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's a great story, but I don't know if I would consider it a classic. The Death
No.
of Jason Todd.
or one that
Mostly
I would.
because all the readers encouraged it to happen.
Well, Jason Todd was a terrible character. Yeah. I mean, he's still around now. And
He's better now.
He's better as Red
He's
Hood.
much better now.
Don't worry,
Much-
he got better.
Yeah. And
Death
that-
was great for him.
Well, and now what's interesting is that sort of set this
Mellowed him out.
That sort of set this precedent for the death of sidekicks and stuff, and we just saw it with the death of Damian Wayne, and now he's back. Yeah, I mean that's once again a discussion for a different day, but it is interesting to look at.
His no death sacred comic books.
Yeah, this is an episode I think we're going to touch on in the,
The
future,
zombie,
which is death in
zombie
comics.
podcast.
Yeah, but I think
The
death in
rebirth of
comics-
all these characters that have been dead.
But I think the death of Superman really set the stage for how death is handled in comics.
Oh, definitely. Just
I mean, Jason Todd had died before that, but I think the death of Superman is definitely where we saw things
everyone
that
else
would
was
lead-
like, wait, we can bring people back?
we can kill our main characters and then bring them back. Because killing Jason Todd, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
But killing Superman,
Ugh.
Superman.
Superman?
Right, but then that would set the stage for things like the death of Captain America, the death of Batman. I mean, they've done. Who hasn't died? Wolverine's dead now.
It's true.
We'll see in 6 months if he's still dead.
Yeah.
You know, what I mean, like he'll be back.
The one that I always find interesting, and I do point people to this, is the rebirth of Flash. If you guys have read Rebirth,
Yes.
the Barry Allen story, he's been dead.
That's also Jeff Johns. Yeah,
Yeah, he's been dead for 26 years.
that was one of the longest.
it was the
running
long.
ones
I don't
was
think it's
Barry
been
Allen.
longer.
I think that is the
Hal
longest.
Jordan was 10 years.
Yeah, I
So
think that
for
is-
26 years, he was dead.
Yeah.
But it is a great Flash story, and he brings you up to speed. Pardon the puns. Thank you. He brings you up to speed really quickly of what happened, why it happened, how he interacts with people, and it's really, really an engaging
No,
story.
it's a great comic for sure.
And I think that I could give that to somebody with pretty good assurance that
Yeah, I think
like
Flash
they would know
Rebirth.
what's going on.
Do you think you could give Green Lantern Rebirth?
You have to give a couple before.
I
You
was
have to
gonna
do
say-
the whole destruction of
Yeah.
Coast City and
Yep.
Parallax.
Yeah, because I think that one's a little hard. Well, also that has.
Now, what do you know about Parallax? Okay, we're going to have to go back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whoa,
exactly.
whoa. We're going way back here.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's great.
See,
and if
there's
you
this
find
thing that's the embodiment of fear, and
Are you familiar with the color yellow?
all right, we got to go back even further.
and I think that that's a great arc, but you have to go way, way back.
Yeah, So, looking at some other maybe individual classics of things that are not DC or Marvel related, we can talk about some great nonfiction works. I mean, I think Mouse comes to mind.
I was going to say I think that's going to be on bookshelves, library shelves, and in the classroom longer than any other graphic novel.
Oh, I completely agree.
Ever.
I mean, you think about something like that. That's not only this brilliant story and the artwork is incredible, but just the historical importance of that.
Right.
What a great way to use the medium to tell a story that might be more difficult to tell or more perhaps easily ignored. I mean, I don't want to say that, but I mean, we've seen a number of Holocaust stories. Everything kind of gets muddled together, but Spiegelman and that found a way to tell that in a new and interesting way that forced people to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
By doing it in this very cartoonish way. It has so much impact as a result of that. Whereas yet another movie about the Holocaust might not have had that same kind of impact.
And it's the only Pulitzer Prize winning graphic novel at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, that alone is going to keep it where other comic books are fading from.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's so I think Mouse certainly,
because that's actually something we really haven't touched on all that much in the episodes of this podcast we've done, and that's like
nonfiction.
The nonfiction comics, like you have stuff like American Splendor or Mouse. And while I don't necessarily know if I consider American Splendor a classic per se, it's certainly an interesting, like, whoa, that happened in comics.
Another important work that may not be a classic, and that's one where you're just like, where do you start?
Oh, the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, but then you're just looking at a man's life, in
exactly.
Such a way.
I mean, start with the Paul Giamatti movie and find the place.
I think that movie actually is a great distillation of it. You know.
Also, the trade of them making the movie, like that's.
Oh, then it gets into that weird kind of thing.
That weird recursive meta.
I mean, that almost gets into like graphic novel journalism, like Joe Sacco stuff.
Yeah,
where you get into this like highly autobiographical, just straight presentation of the facts in a different way. Where once again, Mouse is sort of filtered through the language of comic books, a true story. But then there's also stuff like Blankets.
I was about to bring up, yeah,
we've talked about this a couple of times on the podcast. Craig Thompson.
We're all big fans of Blankets.
It's great.
Well,
you're not a fan of Blankets?
I enjoyed it when I read it.
Here we go.
Yeah, okay. I apologize. This was an opinion that was known.
I'm putting the gloves on.
I enjoyed Blankets. Will I ever reread it? Probably not.
I've read it a few times.
I've only read it once.
But there's that in every medium where it's like, that was really good. I don't need to see that ever again.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a fun read.
Yeah.
Do we consider that? I think I would consider that a classic or a modern classic. Or
I don't think, but here's the thing is I think that's our personal preference. And because we're in the same circle and we know people who have read that and pass that around, who live in the same city that it was made in, I don't think people around the country know that.
Yeah, if you go to the East Coast and say, "Hey, have you heard of Craig Thompson's Blankets?"
True, but is that once?
But if you go over there to like a Comic-Con over there and say, "Hey, have you read The Killing Joke?"
Yeah,
or Mouse.
Yeah,
that's and maybe we're not necessarily defining classics as the most widely read, but that's certainly part of it.
Yeah, I mean this is an interesting discussion. Is how do we define classic?
Sure.
And I think we're sort of narrowing in on that as we talk about this. We're getting closer to discovering what a classic is. Something that also came up a lot on sort of the internet research I did of the great comics is Bone.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Just looking at Bone right now.
Jeff Smith's Bone.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the this achievement. I mean, look at how huge this book is.
Epic comic book.
Right.
As the cover dictates, winner of 10 Eisner Awards and 11 Harvey Awards.
Right. I mean, that's a huge achievement.
Time magazine called it one of the 10 greatest graphic novels of all time.
Exactly. But here's the thing. How well known is this?
I would say this is more well known than
Blankets, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But it's not Watchmen.
No.
But so I guess this is kind of why I want to talk about Bone right now, because I think for sure this is a classic.
And especially within comic book savvy circles.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I feel like if maybe you haven't read Bone all the way through, because it is a dense read. I'm not going to lie, reading all of it.
Well, this is a largely there are smaller versions of it.
Sure. There are trades. Yeah. That was the epic, huge version that I
Right,
owned.
but I mean, just looking at the achievement of this guy.
I like a book you can kill a man with. That's all I'm saying.
This has been mentioned on the show before. And he's writer and artist, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, think about that. Once again, the achievement of this, that he wrote and drew all of this.
No, it's insane.
I mean, and how long did that come out over? Do you know?
I can look in the publication thing at the beginning.
Because I don't think it was a huge amount of time, was it? As we read on the podcast,
I'm quite literally. This is great radio right here. Actually, no, John. It was quite a long time.
Was it? How long was it?
1991 through 2004.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Only 13 years.
I don't know if that's necessarily when the last of it was published, but that was the last time it was collected.
Okay. I don't. Anyway, it's still an incredible achievement, and kind of like Mouse, done in a more cartoonish style.
Yes and no. I mean, have you read Bone all the way through?
Yeah.
The main characters are certainly more cartoony.
Yeah, no, exactly.
How I always describe it to people is say a Looney Tunes group of characters got dropped into an epic fantasy setting.
Right.
And certainly all of the other things I think are drawn in much more detail.
Absolutely. But I still think he's using sort of very classic old style comic book art, and even by mixing it with the more realistic stuff, that juxtaposition of it.
Yeah.
He's telling an interesting story through that, where
Definitely.
it's like, here's these cute things in a story that's not cute and adorable.
Not necessarily, no.
I mean, it's not like
there are moments.
It's not incredibly dark either,
No.
but it's an incredibly unique work for sure.
Definitely.
There's not much out there like Bone.
Not off the top of my head.
And I think that also helps in a classic way. We're talking about these singular things, the Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, these things where it's just like, boy, there's nothing else like that. It's really an original. It's unique in the medium in that way. And I think Bone, and if you look at, once again, the praise of it, outside of just comic book fans as well.
Would you like me to read the back of the book?
You can, if you want to spotlight something specifically.
Book of the Year, says the Comics Journal.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything from something that's not comics?
Charming, character-driven fantasy with elegant design and masterful storytelling in the tradition of Walt Kelly, Charles Schultz, and Carl Barks. Carl Barks? Who's Carl Barks?
No.
Charles Barkley? Says Publishers Weekly.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm saying that you don't see Publishers Weekly on a lot of comics, like a pull quote from them.
Yeah, no.
So, I mean, I think that certainly says something about how Bone has,
Donovan, have you read Bone?
I was going to say, I apologize for my silence. I haven't read a page of Bone.
Oh, wow. Shit.
So I wasn't going to chime in and tell you about
you
my
finish the
favorite part.
comics you have for me, and I'm going to lend you Bone.
That sounds great.
Clearly it's a huge read, and it's an undertaking, but I think you'll really dig it.
Great. I'm going to dig this Bone. I mean, that's 2, ladies and gentlemen. Great. No, I'm very excited. I almost wasn't going to say that and have this moment captured in time of you guys harassing me for not reading Bone.
Oh, please. I'm the one who was not a huge fan of blankets, so.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, you're going to get letters.
Another one.
Digital letters.
Craig Thompson himself.
Oh, my God. Please come on the show and beat up Gregoni.
Yes. That will be our first video of the podcast.
It's just you and I holding him and Craig Thompson punching him repeatedly.
You get 3 swings, buddy. 3 swings and we'll let him go.
Aim for the vital organs. Here's a crowbar.
Because Craig Thompson seems like a guy who would totally be into that.
Sure.
Committing acts of violence against people who
A
don't
random
like
stranger from the internet didn't like something I wrote. Well, he's going down.
He wrote a first love story and then a gripping tale about a young woman growing up in the Middle East and the love and becoming a woman in that. I think he sounds like a real hard ass.
This guy seems like he's not.
We need to get him on Celebrity Boxing.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that show still exist?
No.
Okay.
Oh, come on.
They're going to start it up just for this. Some random podcaster and a comic book artist and writer that most people don't know. They're going to beat the shit out of each other, though.
Another one that we haven't really.
I'm not saying I could take him.
We haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people have read this, but Will Eisner's Contract with God? I mean, that I feel like...
I have not read this.
You haven't read either of you?
No.
Apparently, Donovan's
Whoa,
not read
I've
it.
just found your bone.
Here's Here are the tables. You've just turned them.
I will. This is something I will lend to people who don't read comics. Even it's a single story, but this is right after the Comics Code was kind of failing out, and Will Eisner, who hasn't been writing comics for years because of the scrutiny of the Comics Code, is finally able to tell the story that he wants to tell, and it's about. It's heartbreaking. His daughter had died of leukemia like years before this, and he didn't have a medium to tell this in because comics weren't there. And so it's this story of a man who, like the very first page, he buries his daughter dead to a disease, and he's made years earlier this contract with God, and he goes back on it. And anyways, it is insane and just beautiful and just like gripping the entire time. You don't put it down. And again, as I just said, I don't think
I've never heard of this.
I don't think
I know other Eisner stuff, but I don't know this.
Yeah, it was like right after the Comics Code, and it is brilliant. It is really, better. I mean,
very cool.
I think maybe the best I've read.
Wow,
by Eisner.
I need to check this out.
So I mean, I have a copy. I'll loan it to one or both of you.
That.
But
Same time, we'll rip it in half like Solomon.
Yeah, exactly. You read the first half and you tell John how it was, and he'll read the second half and tell you how it finishes.
Perfect. Oh, wow. Now that makes a lot more sense. Another thing I wanted to talk about that's sort of a singular, as we were talking about this, is Neil Gaiman's Sandman.
Ooh.
A very singular vision. The only reaction...
I believe that was Donovan and I both going, how did we not think of that?
We should have... I know I thought of it. I just didn't know if it was going to get brought up on
I
this.
think for sure that's a classic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the great works of comics.
Yeah, I would definitely include Sandman up there as. I mean, we don't immediately think about it because it's not associated strictly with like Marvel or DC. Or
I mean, it's a Vertigo book, I believe, so it's technically DC.
Just waiting for him to get that sleep gun, and that was my whole thing. That's why I read that.
But it's once again, it's another very singular, specific vision, voice of an artist.
I mean, I could go off on such a huge tangent about just how Neil Gaiman is such a voice of.
I think Gaiman is a guy...
Fiction in general.
Oh, yeah. Gaiman's a guy who should be included in the same discussion with Miller and Moore.
Yeah.
However, a lot of his titles are not as well known as those guys. Sandman is as close as he gets to a Watchmen or a Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
Did you read Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader?
Yes.
That's
which is a great Batman comic.
You read that, Gorgoni?
No.
Oh,
I was just going, because I'm sure you're right.
No, it's great. And like you said, beyond comics as well. What a great storyteller in prose as well.
Oh yeah,
on television, writing episodes of Doctor Who.
Always fun.
I mean, he's just a great writer, and he's a great voice for the medium as well. I mean, listening to him talk about comics and books and things like that.
And that's part of the reason I love him so much is just because he's so passionate about the stuff he writes.
And not crazy, like Miller and Moore?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the bigger shocks. Is just like when you see him interviewed or hear him interviewed, he's such a sweet and charming and loving guy.
He's a very humble, reasonable, intelligent, funny man.
Who just loves what he does.
Right.
And it seems like that he thinks he's blessed for being able to do what he does.
I would say in many ways that's one of the things I love about Gaiman the most is that he's not the tortured genius that Miller and Moore are.
He's just like, you guys like my stories? Hooray!
He just feels like a fan in that way. He feels like a fan who does the thing now.
That was a very accurate depiction.
I feel like that's what I feel seeping out of him every time I hear him talk.
No, that's
just
perfect.
like
there's a real joy to what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. He's in a world where you sort of have this love-hate relationship with Miller or Moore. Mm-hmm. I think everybody just loves Neil Gaiman.
Why wouldn't you?
Right.
What has he done to deserve any sort of ire?
Right, and I think for sure Sandman...
I'm sure somewhere in the streets of London he spit on some guy once. And
I hate him.
That Neil Gaiman, he's going down.
I'll never forget what he did. Says a Guy Ritchie character. But I think for sure Sandman is like his crowning achievement in comics.
In comics, that's his like opus.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we can talk about the influence that's had on stuff as well.
Oh man, you could. That would be a long. That's almost.
We could do a whole episode about Sandman. Really,
yeah.
It's that influential. It's that important. For sure, one of the classics of the medium.
One of the other ones that I feel like we haven't brought up yet is Why the Last Man.
Oh yeah, Brian K. Vaughan.
Yeah, I think that is just a. I mean, I know it's a singular story pretty much, but I thought, I don't know.
I think that's one of those that's on its way to being a classic.
I would almost argue that like it's being overshadowed now by Saga.
Ooh, well, I mean, that is interesting.
Like, I feel like Saga is Vaughn's going to be his
like
premier. This is his magnum opus. This is what he's like going to be known for decades from now.
But what's great about that is if people read Saga and it finishes, which I hope it never does, but it does, then you can go back and read.
Well, this is the point I was going to bring up is because Why the Last Man has finished, I feel like it's easier to look at it as the achievement at this point. But I think you're right. Saga could end up being his masterpiece.
But think about the people it's going to point back to Why the Last Man, and they're going to be delighted when it's actually really good. You know, you're not reading somebody's early story and you're like, oh, well, he hadn't hit a stride yet. I mean, Why the Last Man?
No, Brian K. Vaughan was mid-stride when he appeared.
Yeah, exactly. And so
where's his low point?
There isn't one, and that's
honestly, I think
when he chose to leave Runaways.
I was going to say, I think Runaways, you could argue, could become a classic.
I personally think it is. I wasn't going to bring it up.
I mean, the achievement of Runaways to me of introducing new characters into the Marvel universe is, I mean, not just like side characters of Spider-Man story, a full-on new group of superheroes that have never been seen before in any context.
Yep.
He completely created an original story in the context of the larger Marvel universe. Nobody does that. I can't think of who else has done that in recent years.
I mean, you could point at like the new Miss Marvel and stuff, but that's just like
yeah.
I guess that's kind of more piggybacking on the old Miss Marvel
Yeah, it is
stuff,
that same idea because there's like the Simon Baz, the new Green Lantern as well. I mean, there's other stuff like that where sort of the legacy heroes they're called. I think.
But no, you're right. In terms of just like completely creating original characters in the context of these pre-existing universes, it doesn't.
A whole new book, a whole new set of characters.
Sadly enough, it doesn't happen very often.
It does no. I mean, it never happens. And certainly, Brian K. Vaughan is one of the greats out there right now, and will certainly be one of the greats of all time. But I think for sure, Why the Last Man and Saga as well.
Yeah.
I think both of them will be for sure remembered. But I think they're also in that situation where I'm talking about where Why the Last Man is still pretty recent.
Oh, yeah.
So it's tough to look back at it as a classic, but I think for sure it will become a classic. And another thing that I feel is in that same place is Garth Ennis's Preacher.
I'm less familiar with Preacher. I've read like the first 2 trades of it.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily grok what you're dropping.
Okay. Sure. But I think that I feel like that to me, I kind of lump those two together as similar achievements. They're like Why the Last Man Preacher is a singular story that begins and arcs and ends. And actually, Vaughn did it as well, that same thing with Ex Machina.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I would point to Ex Machina as like, I kind of prefer that one over Why the Last Man.
Right, but that one is going to be under the radar. That's going to be like you've read Saga and Why the Last Man. Have you heard of Ex Machina?
Yeah.
No, you haven't? Read this. It's going to be the cult one of his.
Oh, also Pride of Baghdad. Oh, well, also Runaways.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can launch into whole things. You read his miniseries Logan about Wolverine. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
He's just consistently always genius. He's doing a web comic right now, or a comic that's it's a digital comic. It's not a web comic, but
how do you differentiate those two things?
When
you have to pay for?
Yes.
Okay.
That's it exactly. You pay and then download the issues of this Brian K. Vaughan comic. You don't read it on a website.
Sure.
So no, I think Brian K. Vaughan. Somebody else that we haven't touched on is the work of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, specifically their collaborations with one another.
Yeah.
That I feel like are in the past enough that we start talking about classics. Yeah. Like Long Halloween and Dark Victory.
I mean, Long Halloween and Dark Victory are the two I'd point to.
I would bring up the Colors trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, Spider-Man Blue.
I don't know if that's
what
what's called. That's what I've been referring to it as. I mean, what else?
And Daredevil Yellow.
Yes. I mean, I think those are crowning achievements of all those characters and work at Marvel in general.
Yeah. Crowning of achievements of the characters is a bold statement, and you have to take that against the backdrop of how large the character library is for Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Hulk.
That's true.
That's big.
But I think they are amongst the top.
Those 3 books are some of the most important books for those characters, I would say.
Right.
I think that's the same with Long Halloween and Dark Victory. I think those are some of the best Batman stories.
Well, and once again,
all time.
The thing that we're talking, these are all very singular, individual stories. You can pick up Spider-Man Blue and just read it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hulk
And we
Gray,
recommend it.
Daredevil Yellow, any of them, really.
Yeah.
In fact, all of them are fantastic starting points for those characters.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But they're also amazing stories if you know everything. They're even better as a result of that. To me, that is the most amazing thing you can do with like a long-running character, is tell a story that is singular to itself, and also exists within the larger context of the character and its continuity. And
I feel like, as we've talked about this, we've come to like two categories of classics, stalwarts, if you will.
Yes.
And that's, we have the classics of established characters, which are the Colors trilogy, like you're just talking about, or your Dark Knight Returns.
Right.
Stuff that takes a character and sets it against a story that is just so impactful that it will always be remembered as, that is one of the character points you go to when you say, oh, you want to read Batman? Well, you got to read this, and this, because they're the best.
Right.
The second category of classics, stalwarts, if you want, would be the singular stories that exist outside of the context of anything else, but are so good as to like rise above the rest of the medium in terms of like your Watchmens or your Sandmans, just in terms of like, despite every other comic that's being published, these are the ones that become obvious and apparent, and everyone has read.
Yeah, that they don't have the backing of, I've read this character for 20 years.
And they don't have the baggage of them either, is the thing.
No, there's the pros and cons of that
Right.
are incredible. I mean, really, both are equally amazing achievements because of the things you have to overcome either way. I think that's exactly the case. I think we've nailed down classic / stalwarts.
One thing, not to be cyclical with this
Sure.
episode, but works of Alan Moore that people consider classics but are really interesting when you really pick them apart. V for Vendetta. It's great. It's very dated. It's
Definitely. I mean,
so dated.
Look at the film adaptation of it, how much they had to change to make it a more relevant modern story.
Yeah, and I think people who have seen the film and get the ideas, I mean, it's still...
I think that movie is very true to what that book is saying.
Yeah, but in a more modern sensibility.
Right.
You do that, you enjoy it, and you go back to the other one, and I think people are getting confused by like, wait, why is this person important, and what's this political idea that's going on here? It's great, but it just is. It doesn't maybe... I know Watchmen was very political as well, but I feel like it holds up.
I feel it's
Really
a little bit
well.
more broadly political.
Yeah.
Whereas V for Vendetta is very specifically political. That's Thatcher era London.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of works of art that have come out of that era in England. You look at a lot of the punk rock scene as well. Very specific to that.
Yeah.
That time and that place and that political climate. And I think that's exactly what keeps V for Vendetta from being this like enduring, timeless thing. It's very of its time,
As opposed to, well, even Watchmen though is of its time,
but it's less about its time.
right?
I think, and if anything,
it's-
Watchmen
it's
is
a
starting
little
the
bit.
new time. You know what I mean? Like
No,
it represents, like there's almost like you can almost look at comics like everything before and after Watchmen.
Let's not, but yeah, you could.
You could. I'm saying that marked a distinct
Yes.
point, and then Dark Knight Returns comes out immediately, like the same year.
Yeah.
That those two things came out, and it's like, whoa, comics are different now. If you can do that, then Grant Morrison can a couple of years later go do Arkham Asylum. I mean, you can do. They open up the floodgates for a bunch of new stuff.
Yes.
So I think those are the stalwarts.
One I would be remiss if I didn't mention
Sure.
though would be Fables.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
at least for me, Fables represent such a big, like, taking these characters that we are ingrained in civilization, not just like whatever society you happen to be in, but well, I guess Western civilization specifically.
Yeah.
In terms of these fairy tale characters and kind of skewing them slightly to the side and
Right.
telling some really good stories with them.
No, it's excellent stuff. And who's the guy who does that? It's Bill.
Bill Willington. Oh shit, I'm blanking on his last name. Crap.
No. Fables is amazing, and also just the longevity of it.
Yes. Well, and then we get into like, you look at these runs that are classics, and even within those runs, you're going to have ups and downs.
Because what I was just when you bring this up, it brings on to the same point. I was going to bring up The Walking Dead.
Yeah. There are highs and lows, and I feel like Fables kind of went out with a whisper, not a bang. Like, it had a really good end point and then kept going. And I can't speak to Walking Dead because I kind of fell off like 30 issues ago.
I mean, Walking Dead has always been designed in a just like perpetual motion,
right?
No end in sight. We're just gonna put our head down and plow ahead. So I've never felt reading that comic that like, oh, here's the end.
Right.
It was just like, nope, on to the next thing. It's very much, and that's why it works so well for television, because the comic is very much built on this segment of the story that then leads to this next segment of the story, this next chunk of story.
So would you consider Walking Dead a classic, a modern classic, though, or would you consider it just like this is a turning point in comics in terms of it's an important comic and it's good, but would you necessarily consider it a classic?
Yeah, I think I would call it a classic, actually. I think what it did for horror comics, it's one of the top ones of that. I think it's impossibly readable as well.
But again, does that necessarily make it a classic or just an important comic?
Well, I mean that's a fair point.
Because this is I guess what I was getting at with Fables is like I consider it a classic for me personally.
Yeah,
I don't know if necessarily because I know it's really popular.
Right, same thing with Walking Dead. Yeah, I feel like I feel the same way about it. Where I'm like, oh, how could I not think of it as a classic?
Right.
But I don't know how widely considered a classic it is. It's certainly important, and the way that it's transitioned into another medium.
Stalwart, John.
But I'm saying the way it's transitioned to another medium certainly has to be discussed in terms
got popular on a TV show.
I mean, got insanely
I'm just
popular
saying,
on a TV
if
show.
Once Upon a Time hadn't come around, we'd have a Fables TV show by now.
I think once upon a time, I think that network had the rights to Fables for a while.
Well, I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, they both had pilots at the same time.
Yes.
And Once Upon a Time was the one that got picked up.
Right.
And that makes
they
me
wanted
go,
a fairy tale show.
Frasm, frasm, big
For
bad
sure.
wolf.
So I think as we wrap up our discussion of classics or stalwarts,
I prefer Stalwarts.
I like that we've come around on Stalwarts.
No, that's my new term now.
All right. So as we talk about the stalwarts of the medium,
Yes.
Is there anything else you guys want to add, or anything you feel needs to be said?
I don't think so.
I mean, my last point was kind of Fables.
Yeah, sure.
I know you guys aren't really into the whole manga scene, but I could definitely point to some of those in terms of their importance to the genre. I don't know if to necessarily as comic books as a whole, but
because I think as similar as they are, it's kind of its own thing. Or at least it's perceived as its own thing.
It's perceived as its own thing. It is still comic books.
No, exactly. No, I don't disagree with that, but I'm just talking about the way if you look at a bookstore, there's graphic novels.
No, it's
and then
very
there's
true.
manga.
But say you go to Japan, there's
Sure.
the manga section, which is the comic book section.
Absolutely. But it's still kind of a foreign thing to us.
Sure. But you can point...
Right or wrong, I don't have any judgment about that. I'm just saying that that's kind of the way it's perceived.
So I realize I'd be probably preaching to deaf ears in terms of...
you're fine.
But there are important works that have come out of the East. No, that have been produced that I feel like are super important to how both anime and manga have developed over the years.
I'm sure.
I mean, the original Akira, for God's sake.
I think at this point too, it's not that I'm against it. I just wouldn't know where to begin.
I mean, it does seem impenetrable to a certain extent.
And I hope that in the course of this podcast, I can tear down those walls a little bit and point you towards there are two big categories I feel like are a little or underrepresented on this podcast, and I'm the only one backing them. That's manga and webcomics.
Yeah.
And we'll go into that as we go further, but webcomics is another thing where it's like I feel like that medium is huge and it's a little underrepresented in terms of discussions about comics as a whole.
Right.
And I could talk about what would you consider the classic webcomics.
Right.
And that's also a bit like saying what's the classic newspaper comics, because they're very similar in that respect. Though there are comics on webcomics that are just serialized stories, like you would see in a comic book.
Right.
It's just that they're distributed online by people who are so passionate to distribute their stuff that they're willing to do it for free.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, and I think we've talked about doing episodes about both manga and webcomics.
I definitely want to you guys both to read both of those things. And
Yeah.
I have some plans.
Okay,
Great.
yeah, sure. I mean,
I'm
that'll
very-
be. We'll definitely have discussions about those and how they fit into the medium.
Definitely.
Go on. So I think that wraps up our conversation about the stalwarts of the medium.
Yes.
We turn now to the way we end every episode with our recommendation segment, and we're gonna kick things off with Donovan Eilert.
Just started Powers.
Oh, you lucky bastard.
Yeah, for the first time. I think like the third panel, I was like, all right, I'm hooked. I want to figure out what's going on here.
Who killed Retro Girl?
Have not by any means.
As the name of the first trade states.
Yeah, and I haven't by any means finished it yet, so it's definitely ongoing. But unless it takes a terrible turn for the worse, which both my cohorts here have told me that it doesn't, I think
Not for at least like 100 issues.
great. I can
I don't know if it
highly
ever took a turn for the worst.
recommend. I can highly recommend that just off
We
the
may be getting diminishing returns now, but
Sure, yeah. No,
still
fine.
an enjoyable comic.
Yes.
Yeah,
So-
it's
so Powers is yours?
Powers is and that's it's
Yeah.
pretty
soon
hefty.
to be a series itself.
Oh, I'm super excited for that on
Yeah.
the PlayStation TV or whatever they end up calling
Yeah,
it.
whatever they end up calling
Really?
it. Yeah.
Charlton Copley is going to be the lead. He's going to play Christian Walker.
No way.
Yeah.
Well,
Which,
that's
in terms of physicality, you don't see it, but god damn, is he a good
Yeah,
actor.
Yeah.
You can,
No,
I don't know when that starts, but you can check out a trailer now online for
Yes.
it. That's very cool.
wow.
It
Okay.
looks-
Well,
it looks
that's
pretty
I know
awesome.
what I'm doing right after this.
Okay, Gorgoni?
I have just reread Alias, Brian Bendis's Jessica Jones Star Machine.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a Max series, I
Yes,
believe?
it was
Yeah.
a Max series. In preparation mostly for the Netflix show that's
AKA Jessica Jones.
coming out later, hopefully later this year
I
Question
think
mark?
that's the goal from everything
Yeah.
I've heard there. They don't talk of it.
or
They're-
early next year. Either
yeah,
way.
I mean, Daredevil's sort of taking up a lot of the press right now.
Yeah. But yeah, and then I also just started rereading The Pulse again. So
Yes.
those are both like
So sort of the
Jessica
sequel series.
Jones like series that I've enjoyed in the past and I'm re-enjoying now, and I highly recommend them.
She's a cool character for sure.
Oh yeah,
She's also part of. Oh, she's not one of, but she shows up in Young Avengers as well.
she shows up in Young Avengers. She shows up in New Avengers. She's all over the place.
She is all. Yeah. She is an interesting character in that she's not super well known, but she's all over the Marvel universe.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, for sure. So
John, what do you
hopefully
got?
that show. This week I have a comic called The Illegitimates.
I've heard of this.
It's by Taron Killam, who's an SNL cast member, and also Mark Andraco, and it's drawn by a guy named Kevin Sharp. It's a really cool comic. I'm a big James Bond fan, so it's sort of set in a Bond-like universe about this suave super spy who.
And this is about the illegitimate kids of
So
this-
he's killed.
Yeah.
And they turn to all the illegitimate children that he's fathered over his decades of interactions with women and stuff like that.
Wait, you're telling me I had how many kids?
Exactly.
Oh, dear.
So he's killed, and the agency that he works for has been monitoring these kids for years, waiting to train them should something go on.
Sure, yeah.
And they're from all over the world because he was on his globetrotting
Oh, yeah.
adventures. The one thing we learned about him, he wasn't very careful with protection.
No.
So it's
Listen, if I can't feel the whole thing, there's no point.
if Sean Connery dropped in, what a crazy get for this podcast. I can't believe that.
One thing I've always shot for is the cease and desist letter from Sean Connery. You know this, John.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the only way we're going to have any interaction with him, but it's going to be so cool when we get it.
We'll frame that.
Oh,
Oh,
absolutely,
in a
we
heartbeat.
will.
Put it on my mantle above my fireplace.
It's a super fun comic, though, if you're into like old spy stuff. It has a sense of humor about itself. The other comic I would recommend is Batman: Legends of the Dark Knight, which is it's a digital comic. Not
Not a webcomic.
Not in the webcomic. You do have to pay for it, but it's also they've collected in some trades as well. But it's individual short stories by different artists and writers, all about Batman, and they get cool people like Damon Lindelof, who's not even a comic book writer necessarily, to come in and write these cool little stories about Batman. It's like a collection of short stories. It's pretty awesome, and the different styles and different takes on Batman are cool to see. So
Sweet.
Those would be my recommendations. So I think that's going to wrap things up for this week's episode. As always, I'm John Campbell.
And I've been Mike Gorgoni.
I'm Donovan Eilert. Thank you for listening, and remember, I was right the whole time.
Keep reading comics, everybody.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes. Also, you can follow us on Twitter, @PanelOnPanels, as well as on Facebook, @PanelOnPanels, or email us, panelonpanels@gmail.com.